Our next speaker, um, is Dr. Charles Lefevre, and hopefully I've pronounced your last name close. Charles is the founder of the New World Truffieres Incorporated, a company pioneering the cultivation of truffles in North America. He's also the founder and president of the Oregon Truffle Festival. He received his PhD in forest mycology at Oregon State University, and he conducts research on host associations of the American Matsutake mushroom. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you, Lauren. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation. And this is exactly the group that I'm excited to be presenting to. So I've been working for a long time with our native truffles. I first found the native Oregon white truffles in 1995 on December 7th. I remember it very well. It was a really big deal for me. And I have spent all of the time since then working with them and trying to help. I think this is a native mushroom that can be grown, that we can actually farm these organisms in timber plantations. So that's the point of this talk. New World Truffieres is a company that helps farmers cultivate truffles in orchards. Our main focus is the European species, and our customers are all over the United States. But kind of behind the scenes, all this time that I've been doing this, I've been working on trying to be able to inoculate seedlings with the native Oregon truffles. And through the Oregon Truffle Festival, we have been working to redeem their reputation and drive their price up, which has succeeded gloriously. But first, what are truffles? So truffles are mushrooms. They fruit underground and depend on animals to disperse their spores. That the dependence on animals is actually part of the definition of the word truffle. They are ectomycorrhizal associates with various host trees. In the case of our native Oregon truffles, they're almost exclusively found with the coastal variety of Douglas-fir. And of course, they're celebrated delicacies for thousands of years and among the world's most expensive foods. So the key points I want to make are that the native Oregon white and black truffles are common, widespread, and abundant. On some level, anywhere west of the Cascades, if there's Douglas-fir, there are truffles. The question is only how much. Oregon truffles perform well in taste tests in comparison to the more famous European species, and their prices are beginning to reflect that fact. I think maybe 2 years ago, we actually, for the first time, were able to sell Oregon truffles for prices higher than we were able to buy the famous French black truffles for. The Oregon truffles thrive in Douglas-fir stands planted on farmland. And that type of habitat, the yields we've seen and the prices we've achieved suggest that Oregon truffles could become a viable commercial crop. So these are truffle ectomycorrhizae. It's like think of it like a glove covering the fingers of the roots. And the root tips, the part of the plant that does all the nutrient acquisition, actually has no contact with the soil. It's all of that is mediated by this fungus. It's a mutually beneficial association where both the fungus and the host tree depend on one another. The host tree provides all of the energy for the fungus. The fungus provides all the mineral nutrition for the tree. We have 4 native truffle species here, one of which is named Calipuya, referencing the last talk, Calipuya brunea, and the spelling was developed in consultation with the tribe. It happens to be rare. The 2 that I'm going to talk about mainly are the Oregon white truffles, Tuber oregonense and Tuber gibosum, and the Oregon black truffle. Oregon white truffles live everywhere from the San Francisco Bay Area all the way up Actually, I need to add one more dot to this map. Up on Quadra Island at about 50 degrees latitude, they're found almost entirely under the coastal variety of Douglas-fir, but with exceptions. And those exceptions that I've seen are in Christmas tree farms where there are no Douglas-fir around, and they're just pure stands of grand fir or noble fir. But those are exceptions. The Oregon black truffle. So this is Leucangium carthusianum is actually a name that was given to a truffle in France at the Carthusian monastery in Chartreuse, France. This name is going to change. Unfortunately, we're going to have a new name for our Oregon black truffle. It turns out that a mouse did not eat a truffle in France and swim the Atlantic and cross the continent and deposit its spores here in the West. So this is a new species. But it's also found from San Francisco Bay Area up to just above the 49th parallel in British Columbia. And also specific to the coastal variety of Douglas-fir up until about 3 weeks ago, when the first specimen found east of the Cascades was discovered in the Ochiko National Forest. So there's one collection now from Pseudotsuga menziesii variety glauca. And you notice there's a concentration of these collections around Corvallis. And I think that's probably an artifact of the concentration of mycologists in Corvallis. In fact, these truffles are widespread and abundant throughout both Western Oregon and Western Washington. Seasonality, the Oregon winter white truffle is most abundant December through March, occasionally found from September and all the way through April. Spring white truffle is mainly found in May and June. The Oregon black truffle is fruits year-round. We can find it at any time of year, but it tends to go through a slow period in the summer. And then the Oregon brown truffle, the Calapuya brunea, is so rare that we don't know exactly when the peak season is. It could be sometime like September when we're not out looking for other truffle species. But it does fruit year-round. And I mention it here. It's an interesting truffle. When we do blind taste tests with it, the Calapuya brunea tends to win. It's the truffle people prefer the most, and it may actually end up being the most expensive of them. So these taste tests, we've done these for 20 years in various informal settings. I would not call these rigorous taste tests, but we take whatever truffles we can acquire fresh. We put them in wine glasses, or we serve them on food, or we've done it in various ways, and ask people which they prefer before we tell them what they are. So they're sort of semi-blind. And the results have never varied. In every test we've ever done, the Oregon truffles score comparable to the more famous European truffles, or better than. So here are just two examples of in 2014 and 2018 where we had good sample sizes at the Mount Pisgah Mushroom Show here in Eugene. The Oregon black truffle and the Oregon white truffle both scored on par with the famous Italian white truffle, which is one of the most famous delicacies on the planet and most expensive. And then again in 2018, the Oregon white truffle actually, I would say, won. These are not very fair comparisons in the sense that those Italian white truffles had to cross the Atlantic and then spent many days in FedEx boxes and so forth. It's hard to do a very controlled study of this sort of thing. But I think what these data show is that the Oregon truffles are better than their historic price and reputation suggests. And this was the impetus for us to launch the Oregon Truffle Festival. We saw an opportunity to effectively redeem these truffles that had initially, they were harvested badly without attention to whether or not the truffle was ripe. They actually, unlike other mushrooms, a truffle needs to be ripe in order to have its culinary value. And then also they were sold as inexpensive substitutes for the real thing, where I think we have the real thing. They're not substitutes for anything. Prices. So I mentioned the Italian white truffle, $1,000 to $4,000 per pound. This past year was perhaps an anomaly, but prices were up to $4,500 per pound for Italian white truffles. The French black truffle, $500 to $1,000 per pound. These are prices that restaurants would pay. And then there are a number of other European truffle species that sell for lower prices. So here, the Burgundy truffle, $125 to $400. So the Oregon truffles, historically, when they were harvested with rakes, or they still are harvested with rakes, are among the least expensive of all truffle species. And we were seeing that even in bad years when there were not many truffles to find, the price did not drop, which suggested that supply was exceeding demand even in the worst years. So it's sort of a worst case marketing scenario. Whereas through the Oregon Truffle Festival, we've introduced truffle dogs, which do the quality control. They choose which truffles are ready and leave the rest behind. So they're actually more important for quality control than they are for finding the truffles in the first place. And here we see that the price of dog harvested truffles are up in the neighborhood of the French black truffle. So I think we've succeeded in redeeming their reputation. And those of you who've heard of Oregon truffles are probably aware that the way they've been harvested historically was very destructive. But the main problem is that it's indiscriminate. The truffles ripen over, say, a 3-month period, but they're all in the ground simultaneously. Raking just collects them all, even those that are not yet ready. And unfortunately, the peak demand season for Oregon truffles is prior to the holidays, but that's actually a little early for the truffle season. So nearly all of the truffles are harvested before they're ripe, and the price and reputation reflect that fact. So raking produces mostly immature truffles. It also does a lot of soil disturbance, and this contributes a lot to the bad reputation of the industry. This is a particularly severe example of it, but often the truffles are down 12 or 14 inches, and the harvesters will go that deep looking for them. They won't do that all at once, though. They will come and get the truffles in the top few inches. Once those are all gone, they'll go deeper and deeper again. So at this particular site, it's in the Coast Range. It's about 5 acres. And this was done to the entire 5 acres. And you can imagine just the human cost of this much physical labor. If you were to pay somebody to do this, it would cost a fortune. It's very destructive and very expensive, costly, time consuming. Whereas the dog can just run right to the truffle. They can find them from 100 feet away. So truffle dogs minimize soil disturbance. They ensure reliably ripe truffles. Any breed can be trained. We have a part of the Truffle Festival is a truffle dog competition. And a number of years ago, a Chihuahua mix won the competition. So if Chihuahua can win it, anybody can win it. The training process can be very simple. There are actually 2 dogs in this photo. The one in the back here was trained in just 4 sessions in my backyard. And the first time we took him into the woods, he was finding truffles right off the bat. So it was really, really very easy. Although, when a dog is distracted by animals, individual dogs can have individual problems. So really, there's no better way to find a truffle. The dogs make it much less work, much less disturbance. They're good ambassadors for the industry. They can find a truffle from 100 feet away. And one of the benefits is that it makes it possible to harvest truffles profitably under circumstances where a raker would not be finding enough to justify the time. So in a sense, creates a lot more habitat. And then, of course, it extends the season in a sense that the dogs can still find truffles when there are very few of them around. So these truffles are fruiting on farmland. And this is a famous example of a Christmas tree orchard near the town of Lebanon, where they were in the process of harvesting the Christmas trees, about 8 years old, and started finding these lumps of fungus underground and took them to the Extension Service, and who took them to the Forest Mycology Lab at OSU, who promptly went out there to see this. and found some of these magnificent white truffles under 8-year-old trees. And this is a very anthropogenic setting. This is the kind of thing that we can do again. So the typical Oregon white truffle habitat, here's the definition, and the definition is based largely on this photograph. It's Douglas-fir trees between the ages of 15 and 30 years, planted on pasture or farmland, immediately adjacent to older trees, older Douglas-fir trees, which is where the spores come from. And that this kind of habitat and this land use history is often associated with small landholdings that are typically close into town. So it's often in somebody's backyard. So this is the definition of truffle habitat. And considering that the truffles travel through a mouse is the dispersal vector for these truffles. They can't travel all that far from older trees. So there need to be older trees nearby. And here is an important example for us, because I used this site as a field laboratory for a number of years. This is a bed and breakfast southwest of Eugene. You can see 20, I think this photo was taken about 2000, this aerial photo. It's pasture. It was planted with Douglas-fir in cooperation with the Forest Resource Trust as a set aside for, I believe, oxygen generation. They're trading oxygen credits or something like that. Anyway, the trees are contractually set aside from logging until they reach something like 60 years old, I believe. I haven't actually seen the contract. In the meantime, this stand of trees right here, you can see kind of naturally seeded, and then there's some older Douglas-fir right here. These younger trees are a truffle patch themselves. So when these new trees were planted, the truffles had to travel just a short distance to find them. And this site, I had been watching it since essentially the day it was planted. And when at the point where the canopy closed, I went and knocked on the door of the bed and breakfast, and they let us go check it out. And sure enough, there were truffles. We immediately established study plots to take a census of truffle production over time. And here's I'll discuss those census results. Here's the stand from below, pretty typical stand that you've all seen a lot of. And here it is on the inside. This photo was published in the Wall Street Journal. We've had a lot of journalists out to this site. It's actually the place where we've done our truffle dog training seminar and our truffle dog competition. We've taken hundreds of people there at this point. Oregon black truffle habitat is similar, but this Oregon white truffles tend to be most abundant on our red soils, where the Oregon black truffles tend to be most abundant in our black soils. So this is typically deeper in the Coast Range. There's more precipitation through the year. The soils are deeper, they're softer, higher organic content. The soil texture may be the same as silty clay loam, but these are the kinds of soils that as you walk through the forest, your feet sink into the ground. It's very soft. You typically don't need any kind of tool to dig in this soil. You can dig in it with your hands. And I'm curious, actually, what the truffles may actually be helping create that beautiful soil structure. I suspect that the soil was not that fluffy when it was farmland. And then there are other kinds of habitats. The truffles are ubiquitous throughout the forest. They live in old growth. They live in every age of stand. One of my favorite trees is a 9-foot diameter Douglas-fir that produces both the Oregon white and Oregon black truffles. But this kind of young, afforested stand is where they seem to be found in the greatest abundance. And this is my dogs. On our last day of hunting in this site, they have 6 pounds of truffles there, which at the wholesale, kind of below wholesale rate of $400 per pound, they did quite well that day. Even though they ate as many as they let me have. So the productivity plots from that bed and breakfast site over the years produced a result of an average yield over the 6 years that we have data of 30 pounds per acre. And the site is about 8 acres. So this site is really very productive. And the math is not difficult. You multiply 30 pounds per acre times that kind of bulk distributor price of $400 per pound. It's really quite good considering there's no cost associated with producing this crop. There are no inputs, no water, no fertilization, no working the soil. The costs are all those associated with having timberland. The only cost is actually that of harvesting, grading, shipping, cleaning, all of that. And here's the baggies in the photo are from our sample plots. You can see these sample plots, we used our rake we were using rakes so we get them immature before the animals had started to harvest them. And we used our rake to scribe a circle in the ground that was approximately 9 feet in diameter, and then collected all the truffles. So these bags completely filled with truffles were collected within a 9-foot diameter circle. It's absolutely remarkable. In the 2014 and 2015 years, I think in 2014 we counted approximately 50,000 truffles. And this is extrapolated from the plots. The plots represented 2% of the sampling area. And then in 2015, it was 38,000 truffles. So it suggests that the size of the truffles varies from one year to the next. And we can mine these data for evidence of climate influence, or weather influence, all sorts of things. And then, of course, we can do spatial analyses. I suspect what we'll see is that the truffles fruit in any given plot for just a couple of years and then move on. So what we can do to try to enhance this crop in timber stands, the main thing is we tend to find the truffles near the edges or in stands where the trees are relatively far apart, have a high crown ratio. So the trees are all getting enough light. So the truffles are living on the overstory dominant trees. And particularly with white truffles, when the stand becomes crowded and the stems become spindly, crown ratio reduces to 20% or so, the truffles disappear. But we do know that if the stand is pre-commercially thinned or even commercially thinned prior to the end of truffle production, that truffle production will continue beyond that. And presumably by maintaining trees with plenty of light, plenty of energy capture, we can prolong truffle production in these stands beyond that 30 years. I suspect my 9-foot diameter tree is around 500 years old. It's also pretty clear that the weather really affects truffle production. So typically the best seasons are those where we have good rain in the month of September without a lot of hot weather. One of the worst case scenarios is good rain in early September followed by hot, dry weather. That convinces the truffles to form primordia, and then the hot weather kills them. And that's a disaster scenario where we get no crop. But if we have good rain at any point in September, followed by mild conditions, then we usually have a reliably, predictably good crop. And of course, we can emulate those conditions with irrigation in those rare scenarios where forest land has irrigation water, which is pretty uncommon. But if we were to put these trees on farmland that does have irrigation, we could conceivably farm truffles under Douglas-fir trees. And then, of course, like every other organism living in the soil, they use all the same minerals that the trees do, and those can undoubtedly be optimized for truffle production. There's some suggestion that many truffles actually benefit from higher soil pH and calcium. So, and that was that example of the Christmas trees that I showed earlier. The only thing unusual about that stand of trees is that the farmer had put an unusually high amount of lime on the ground before planting the Christmas trees. So the benefits. Well, I think one of the main benefits of a truffle crop is annual cash flow. And I think particularly for small scale timberland owners that don't have a lot of cash flow, a truffle crop that's producing $10,000 or $12,000 per acre per year could both pay for pre-commercial thinning and incentivize it, because you want to maintain that kind of open stand where the trees are not competing for light. So in order to maintain that annual income, you have to thin. So I think it could really help the timberland owner in that way. We have working examples of truffles fruiting in stream buffers. And then, of course, if the landowner is making $10,000 or $12,000 per acre per year, there's a financial incentive to extend the rotation age with all of the ecosystem services benefits that provides, and the fact, of course, that the trees are growing faster as they age and so forth. I want to mention that there's not just a market for fresh truffles, there's also a huge market for value-added products, which are very easy to create. This example here of this bucket full of eggs with black truffles mixed in, all you need to do to double the value of those eggs is to put a lid on that bucket and keep it in the refrigerator overnight. The same below that is a bowl of cream with truffles around it. That truffle aroma soaks into the cream and becomes very concentrated. And we've, through the Oregon Truffle Festival, co-branded a truffle beer made by infusing hazelnuts with white truffle. And then the hazelnuts are used to make a hazelnut stout beer. This is made by Wolves and People Brewery. And then also truffled salami. Olympia Provisions makes truffled salami. And there's no contact between the truffles and the food, so there's no food safety issue. A few services are available for people who are interested in this, and a number of people offer these. So remote surveys and on-site surveys for truffles, truffle dog training, lease arrangements, and spore inoculum if you like to try to introduce truffles into your stand. And you can contact me about any of those. And a few other resources. The Oregon Truffle Festival, my company, New World Truffieres. There's a feasibility study about truffles in Oregon at OregonTruffles.org. And then for the bigger picture, the book Taming the Truffle by Ian Hall is the best English language resource out there. So that's my talk. And if there's any time, I welcome questions.
Yeah, I think we have time for maybe one or two. So the first question is, do you know why the truffles thrive on Douglas-fir growing on farmland?
I suspect actually that they're just one of those early successional species that thrive in a grassland soil ecology. They seem to lack the metabolic capability to use wood or any things like bark and wood. So if there are legacies from a prior stand of trees, then it kind of changes the competitive dynamics, where those fungi that can benefit from metabolizing wood and bark tend to have the competitive advantage. I think that's the reason. And so in those situations where even on older trees, there isn't a lot of wood in the soil, the truffles will persist for a long time.
Great. I think we have time for one more if you can make it a quick answer. Sure. How would you recommend a landowner explore truffle enterprise if you have the right habitat?
Look up that feasibility study at OregonTruffles.org, and you can contact me if you think you might have truffles. I'm happy to help.
Okay, great. Would you mind answering? We do have 3 more questions that are in the Q&A. If you wouldn't mind answering them, typing an answer or sure, putting them in the chat, we'd love to hear the answers to those. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a great presentation. I definitely learned a lot of new things. And we'll look forward to seeing the answers to those questions in the Q&A box.
Yep.
Thank you.